We're going to go ahead and call the board meeting to order for February 23rd, 2023. John, you take attendance?
All board members are present with the exception of Trustee Colin, who should be walking in momentarily.
Thank you. We can stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
At this time, we'd like to take a personal privilege so we can have a moment of silence for the tragic loss of lives of our Michigan State students, Ariel Anderson, Brian Frazier, and Alexander Bernier. So we can pause for a moment of silence. Thank you.
Madam President, may I make a motion regarding today's agenda?
Yes.
Okay. Due to the district's inclement weather closure, I move that the Board of Education postpones 2A Celebrating Successes Esports State Championship, and the district reschedules the team's recognition on a future meeting agenda. I also move that 8K 2023 Board of Education goals is tabled on tonight's agenda, and the Board of Education places the topic on the March 9 study session.
Thank you, John. It's been moved. Is there a second?
I second.
It's been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Okay. Next on the agenda, we'll have the public comment. Public comment is an opportunity for the public to address the Board of Education. It is not a time for dialogue. In the interest of time, and the Open Meetings Act provides the board that the board may place limits, time limit and allotment for any individual who has a comment. In addition to making a public comment, you may also email the board at any time. Any comments that contain profanity, threats, defamatory remarks, or is directed at any person not employed by the district or a member of the Board of Education in their official capacity and related to the role and responsibilities for which they are employed or serve, or is otherwise exempt from the First Amendment protection and will be excluded from public comment. If you are speaking on behalf of a group or an organization, please identify who you represent. Thank you for taking the time to address the Board of Education. We will have the time set for 3 minutes per person, and our first public comment is one of our past board members, Cynthia Van Owen. And Megan will be doing the time for today.
Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all on this cold winter night. Cynthia Van Oyen was a member of this board for 22 years. So I'm with you this evening to give some perspective and voice of experience to share with you on a couple of items on tonight's agenda. One of them is your goals, which I understand you're taking off the agenda for tonight, but I still have some things I want to tell you about that. But I don't want to come across as a grouchy old community member, but I do have some advice. So specifically on the strategic plan for the recreation and community services, for the draft, I've read it through twice with some detail, and there's a few things I want to call to your attention. One that is throughout a concern, and one is an omission that I think you need to consider. First, throughout the report, every mention of Lahser, L-A-H-S-E-R, is misspelled. On the road, on the site, at the school, every time it's mentioned in the report, it's spelled incorrectly. I can tell you that if you had a child that attended or attended yourself, people will look at that and say, boy, even the school district doesn't know how to spell. Please make sure you get that corrected sooner rather than later on the website so people downloading it don't see that, because it's something that people just dismiss you right out of hand without even thinking about it much more. But more importantly, I do want to call out that when we closed Hickory Grove Elementary School and eventually made plans to sell that site, Rob Glass, Howard Barron, and I met with neighbors around that area, and they were with the developers, and they were very angry, and most of what they were angry about was regarding the loss of playground and walking trails around that site. And after many, excuse me?
1 minute left.
Many people, we walked away from that trying to promise them that whatever we would do at the Losser site would include that, so that all of that area which would have lost access to an elementary school playground would have one restored. And I can tell you, if you want to be going for a sinking fund or any other project, neighborhoods have long memories. You may not have served very long, but they've lived around here a long time, and they will come back to bite us if we don't keep promises that we've kept. I do believe that we ought to be considering creating a recreation authority, and that is something I'd be happy to talk with you about on another time. I think it is an opportunity to offload some ongoing expense for recreation, and the laws have been changed that would allow it to happen, and I would encourage you to look into that in much more depth. In regard to goals, you have 15 or 16 goals. I can tell you, I've got show and tell here. In 25 years, this board has never had more than 9 goals, and that's usually was only 5 or 6. You've got way too many goals here. And the most important goal you should have this year, and I don't see on your list, is the fact that you are opening 2 middle schools and reorganizing your schools this year, and your administration is going to be spending a primary amount of their time making that come to a safe and effective reality for all of our students. And it's like having a second job on top of the regular job, and that should be your #1 goal, and I don't even see it on your list. You've got too many goals, and you don't focus on what's most important. I'd be happy to show you my show and tell anytime you want to talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we will move on to Superintendent's report.
Thank you, Dr. Southward. Just a couple of quick updates. One, I recently had the opportunity to walk through the construction at Conant, at BHMS, which will be South Hills, North Hills, and at Way. Things are coming along nicely, and we're still in good shape for fall of 2023 to open. In particular, looking at the updates at South Hills and North Hills to see how far it's come along and what is really a short period of time. It's been great. One other quick announcement or report, just a congratulations to our girls varsity basketball team. Last year the team finished in last place. This year they finished in first place and won the first league championship in school history. So really exciting time for our girls basketball program. Dr. Southward, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. My president's report is short and sweet. I would just like to take the time out to thank all of our community volunteers. I really appreciate our PTOs and all of the time that our parents and community members do for our district. And so I wanted to make sure we took the time out to thank you, because without you, there are so many things that we wouldn't be able to do. So really appreciate all the efforts that our community volunteers do for our district. So thank you for that. All right, consent agenda. Secretary VanGemert.
All right, I move the Board of Education approve the recommendations detailed in the consent agenda as follows. Request to approve minutes from organizational and regular meeting of January 26, 2023. Request to approve minutes from the study session of February 9, 2023. I move that the Board of Education approve the financial reports as presented by Karen Hildebrandt, Director of Finance. I move that the Board of Education approve the disbursement reports as presented by Karen Hildebrandt, Director of Finance.
Second.
Motion has been moved and properly seconded. Is there any discussion? Okay, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. I forgot to say that. No abstentions, 6-0. 7. Oh, it's 7 of us.
Yes.
Got to learn how to count, too.
Paul is here.
All right, we're going to go on to item number 7, general discussion. February benchmark assessment report. We will bring up to the podium Learning Services team. How exciting. We're so excited.
Thank you, board members. So today I'm here to present our benchmark assessment data. So this will show like how we're doing with student achievement so far this year from fall to winter. So you'll get a nice overview of everything that we've been working on so far with our data. This falls in nicely with our continuous improvement process. Some of you heard of MyKIP, our Michigan Integrated Continuous Improvement Process, which is our new district improvement through MDE, the Michigan Department of Education. So this falls in nicely where we can see how kids were doing in the fall when they first arrived back at school within the first few weeks, and then how we're doing as of winter with our next round of testing. We just collected and pulled in that data to pull together for you. So it fits in nicely with that. And then this is something that we do every year, just so you know, especially new board members. But this falls in line too with our School Aid Act Section 98B, where we're going through a continuous improvement process where we look at our fall data and see how we're doing, we look at our winter, and we make adjustments based on what we're seeing with students now. So it falls in nicely with the law as well as our continuous improvement, like I said. And so you'll get another report in June before we leave for summer so we can see how kids did across our school year and what our next steps are as we look to summer plans and how kids, what we're gonna do to help kids as they come back the next fall. So that's why we're here tonight, so thank you. As you see on your screen too, you'll see there's 2 specific assessments that I'm going to talk about tonight. The first is our FastBridge, that's our adaptive computer assessment, and I'll explain that further in a second. And then I'm also going to take a little bit of time to talk about our Fountas and Pinnell literacy assessment that our teachers use as well. Oops, and it jumped ahead, so give me 1 second. There we go, okay. So a little bit about FastBridge. So each of our schools, K through 9, so even 9th grade at the high school, we give this assessment in literacy and math 3 times a year, so fall, winter, and spring. It is computer adaptive, which means that as students are taking this assessment, the questions get harder and more difficult to kind of see where a child is in relation to standards. It is a short enough test that it's not all the standards. There's no way a test could possibly test all the standards there are in a grade level, but it's a nice sampling so we can kind of see how are our kids progressing. It's a screener to also identify who might need support, who might benefit from support. And again, it's just 1 data point, and we want our teachers looking at multiple data points across the year, not just 1. But what's great about this, you know, as I said, it's adaptive. It's our universal screener so we can see who needs support. We do this with all students, even students with IEPs. And it helps us like evaluate where their current skills are like right now in the moment. It helps us start to predict future achievement and then assess their learning growth so far in the year. Like, are they keeping on track with their peers? They're designed to be quick and efficient and valid and reliable as well so that we can make decisions at a grade level, a department level, building level, and district level. And to see if there's any specific skills that we might need to shore up with a particular student. It does give us a menu of things that a student might need to work on. Again, it assesses in reading and math. As I was reminding you too, our students are not defined by 1 score or label. We want to look at multiple data points, and today you're just seeing that 1 data point and how we're doing. Keep in mind when we sit down and meet with teachers, we're looking at multiple data points to see how a child is doing. Obviously, we want to help our students grow across our year. And then the great other thing about FastBridge is that it offers family reports to show how a student is doing over time, and then it shows how the student is doing in comparison to other students in our district and how our students are doing compared to other students across the nation. And so you'll get just an overview of our district with that information. So that's just a little bit about FastBridge. Our former assessment was NWEA, just so you know, and we've been using FastBridge for about 3 years now. The other assessment we are going to talk about tonight is Fountas and Pinnell. That's our literacy assessment. And A little bit about that. That is where a teacher in a classroom, and this is K through 5, just so you know, so this is elementary specific. A teacher sits one-on-one with a student right next to them. The teacher will select a fiction or a nonfiction text. They try to alternate to make sure that kids are going with lots of different types of text and not just fiction, for example. As they're sitting one-on-one with that student, right next to the child, and the child is reading the text and looking at the pictures, the teacher's recording all kinds of information on a sheet. They're looking at how are they decoding words and their word accuracy. They're looking at their fluency and how they're phrasing and chunking their words together as they read. They're looking at, are they paying attention to the punctuation as they read, which influences how you pronounce things as you go through a story. And then at the end, they're looking to see how long it took the child to read that story. And then they're also having a comprehension conversation about the book that they just read or the text. And the teacher will determine, oh my gosh, this child did great, they're independent, I'm gonna make sure they have lots of level books at this level because they can pretty much read them on their own and do fabulously. Or they might say, okay, I'm gonna take this child another level higher. They'll do that same assessment again and decide, okay, I might have some teaching points with this child. There's some things that they're missing or they're not decoding something correctly, and they'll decide, okay, so that's my next teaching steps for this student. This is an instructional level for them. That's where they might see across their classroom, there's a small group of students that are in that similar reading level, and they'll pull them for small group instruction based on the skills that they need help with in their reading. So it's very connected and student-driven based on what the teacher is observing and recording from that student reading a text. So it's one of our great assessments that I love. Tells you everything you need to know about a child's reading. I wanted to show this a little bit just to talk about our district, and we really believe in a balanced assessment system. As I was mentioning, not just looking at one assessment. So this comes from MAC, which is the Michigan Assessment Consortium, and they really talk to districts about having a balanced assessment system across your district. That yes, you might be at that tiny top level looking at national data, but it doesn't drive instruction, and then you have your state level assessment data that tells you how you're doing compared to other kids across the state. Our district assessment, which is where we're at today, which is our benchmark data to see, okay, overall, how are we performing as a district? How are we doing? How are our kids performing? And then we have the next level, which is classroom-based assessments, and then you see the bulk of our assessment work is formative assessment, which is driven daily in the classroom. They're just simple, quick assessments that teachers give to see, okay, here's our learning target for the day. Today in reading, we're gonna study how to summarize a short piece of text. So the kids know what the learning target is, and then the teacher will ask questions and observe the student to see, okay, how are they doing with summarizing text? They might even have a rubric. The students might even help develop that rubric, and then they can see how are they performing and where do they need to bump up next to. So it guides instruction, and it's literally for the students. Like, that's the purpose of formative assessment, just to give you a quick sampling of what it is. But you can see that's the bulk of the work, and again, today you can see where benchmark assessment data kind of fits in, looking at all types of assessment. So I wanted to share that with you. Next up, it's the whole idea that, when we're looking at data, that this is all for our students. It's that feedback and communication on how they're doing. It's setting those learning targets. It's helping students with goal setting, and then using our assessment data to drive that instruction to support our students the best that we can, and then doing that alongside our families. So this is all about our students. So next we're going to dive into our district overview. How are we doing? So this particular graph that you see in front of you comes straight from Fastbridge. Of course, I tweaked it, made it our own. But what this is showing you is the percent of students that are on track. So in Fastbridge, when the student takes the adaptive math assessment, for each grade level, fall and winter, they set a benchmark score. So let's say, for example, in the fall for 4th grade, the benchmark kids were supposed to be at 210, right? And then in the winter, the kids are supposed to be at 215. So the benchmark increases with each window, that they have to hit a higher benchmark, and we know that the questions get harder. But what this graph is really showing you when you look at the purple sections, the low risk and the on track, those are the kids that are meeting the benchmark expectation for that time of year. So we can see from this in the fall, we had 84% of our students hitting the grade level benchmark. And this is the average of all the grades. And then for winter, it was 82%. In terms of one of the things in the state we use is multiple tiered systems of support, right? And what the state says is that your core curriculum and content and teaching, what teachers do in the classroom, should be meeting the needs of 80% of your students, right? And then they say 15% of students, right, might need a little bit of extra support. It doesn't mean they're not on grade level, but they need some support with either the standards or specific skills to stay on grade level and keep track with their peers. So we provide what we call Tier 2 interventions to support those kids. This helps us identify who those kids might be, right? So the lighter pink that you see when you see like 14% for winter, those are kids that we're looking at alongside some other data to say, okay, this child may need some extra support in math. Let's look at what our Fast Bridge report says and see what skills we might need to shore up with that student. Or vice versa, teachers also using that data to say, no, based on our classroom assessments with Envision Math or Big Ideas Math, I'm not seeing it. This kid is doing great with these standards. So teachers have some decisions to make based on the student data they're seeing. On this one-day screener, it's just telling us that 14% of our students might need support. We have to take our reports and look and see, does that student or that group of students really need something more, right? And so the teacher will make decisions alongside the learning specialists and the interventionists in the building. So they do data digs throughout the year as well. And then that 4% that you see, those are the students that, according to FastBridge, on this sampling of standards, they're saying they need some intensive love and support to stay caught up with their peers. It doesn't mean they're not at grade level, doesn't mean they didn't make growth from fall to winter, it's just saying that's the percent of students that hit the benchmark for that grade level for this time of year. So that's math, so it is great to see, it is exciting to see that over 80% of our students are at benchmark across our district. So that's a good thing to see in terms of MTSS. We're right where we should be in terms of what the state says. Multiple tiered systems of support, just in case I slip into using acronyms. For reading, what we're seeing from the fall, again, same thing as math. We're just trying to see the percentage of students that are at benchmark for this time of year. So that's both the purple section, so that's 80% in the fall, and then 80% in the winter. And keep in mind, that's hitting a higher benchmark, right, for this time of year. So if in literacy and math in 4th grade, the kids were supposed to be at 450, now they're supposed to be at 455, we still have 80% hitting that benchmark. So we're doing good in terms of our tiers of support and meeting most of our student needs. Okay, what's different about this graph, the purples and pinks, now we have red, yellow, golden color, and some green and teal. So let me explain what this is different. So I know that you like to know, how are we doing against the nation? So that's what this graph is about. So this is AMath, the adaptive math test for K-9. And what the difference is here is this is a percentile ranking, not a percent proficient, not a percent of material covered. This is like if we were to take the students, like 100 students, and we were lining them up from the lowest score to the highest score. And a kid was at the 50th percentile, that means that they did 50% better than their peers across the nation. And so what we're seeing here, right, when you think about the old bell curve, how many of you learned about that in school, the bell curve? We're like 25% to 75% along that bell curve, and obviously 50% was at the top of the bell, right, was dead average. I mean, in a typical classroom, right, you would see that 25th to 75th, that some kids are low average, some kids are dead average, and some kids are high average. Right, and then you've got the above average, beyond the 75%, and then the below average, below the 25%. FastBridge has a higher expectation, so they make their cuts at the 30th percentile and the 85th. And so what this is telling you is that in math, 33% of our students in this district are at that 85th percentile or higher, if we were to rank order our students against kids in the nation. 56% are in that average range, like low to high average. And then what I also put in there for you is, okay, where exactly, because that 30th to 85th is like a long range of kids in the average in a classroom, I put where the 50th percentile would be. And so what that's telling you is that, right, we have 57 31s, we have like 88% of our students are either average or high average across our district. That's a huge chunk of our kids, right? But it's telling you that 72% are at the 50th percentile and above, right? So that's a huge number of our kids. And then for about 14% are just below dead average, but they're still in the average range. When we see the yellow, that golden color, right, 4 to 5% of our students are in that 20th to 29th percentile, which means those students might need some support. We have to look at other data points. And then obviously the 0 to 19th percentile, those are kids that need a lot of intensive love and support to stay caught up with peers across the nation. And so we're providing those interventions for students. So that's math, but I wanted to explain what the difference is between a percentile, right? It's ranking, versus a percentage, right? So we're not talking here about 30% proficient. We're talking about the idea that kids at the 30th percentile are doing 30% better than other students in the nation. So again, that's a huge chunk of our kids. And then you'll see the same thing for a reading, right? Our adaptive reading test. We're seeing similar trends to math, right? Where we have like well over 88% of our students that are in the average to high average range, and then 72% of our students are at the 50th percentile or higher. Okay. And it's similar from fall to winter as well, that we're maintaining that percentage of students at that percentile. I'm going to switch gears for just a second. So that's a little just overview of FastBridge, reading and math. I'm going to switch gears to Fountas and Pinnell, again, which is that one-on-one literacy assessment that a teacher does with a student. The reason why in the fall it says 1st through 5th grade, and then in the winter it says K through 5, it's because in kindergarten, not all of our students come in reading. So it's hard to give them a reading test if, you know, kids coming into kindergarten, some of them are still learning to recognize their name in print. Some of them are still learning their letters and sounds. They don't know them all. And so we have some other teacher-level assessments we give called the Michigan Literacy Progress Profile, where it will test a student on just their letter identification or their sound recognition. It will test phonemic awareness, which is where, like, in like preschool or before kindergarten or even into kindergarten, the phonemic awareness is what you hear. And so, for example, we're testing kids on, like if I say to you, bat, what's the beginning sound in bat? And the kids have to say, ba. So we're just listening auditorily to see what they do. We're looking to see if they can rhyme, or we're looking to see if the kids give us a word, like kind of the opposite, right, effect, not just identify it, but what do they hear, and it's not in print. It might be the beginning sound and the ending chunk. So if I say, b-at, like you're just giving the sounds, the kid has to put the word together to say, that's bat, right? So they're having an auditory understanding of what they're doing with sounds. That's what phonemic awareness is. So a lot of our kids in kindergarten are coming in, and we're helping them with that phonemic awareness before we're trying to do phonics as well, which is what's in print with sounds. That makes sense. So a lot of rhyming, a lot of alliteration, those kinds of things that we're doing with kids. So it's really hard. The kids that are reading, we do give the Fountas and Pinnell if they're ready to read. But then we know as kids progress throughout the year, more and more of our kids are beginning to read in kindergarten, and so winter's a nice time where we start doing that Fountas and Pinnell, the reading assessment. Like, can they read? No, no, no. Can they read? Yes, yes, yes. Do they know some simple sight words? And so we're looking at those kinds of things. So that's what this test is. So the reason why, again, why kindergarten isn't to the winter, it's because a lot of our kids don't come in reading in kindergarten, very, very few. But what this shows is that at least 1st through 5th grade, we had, if we look at the blue and the green, the blue is meeting expectations. That means based on state and Fountas and Pinnell recommendations, which is research-based, our kids at a reading level where they're supposed to be for that grade level at that time of year. And throughout each testing session, the meeting expectations, the level a child is supposed to read at, increases throughout the year, right? So every trimester, they're expected to read at higher reading levels, right? And that's what the teachers are assessing. Are they getting better at reading? Are they improving their reading level? So what this is saying is that 81% of our students at the fall were already meeting expectations or exceeding expectations for the grade level for that time of year. And then in the winter, again, if we look at the green and the blue, and now this includes kindergarten, what we're seeing is that 85% of our students are reading at grade level or above. You can see a huge chunk are exceeding what Fountas and Pinnell says is the expectation for winter. The nice thing about this is we see that from fall to winter is that the number of students not meeting expectation lowered, so that means they moved up in reading levels. And then obviously you can see approaching expectations changed a little bit, and then obviously we increased the number of students meeting and exceeding expectations from fall to winter. So that's Fountas and Pinnell. And so now we're going to look more at some disaggregated data. So this is by grade level. So for math, we have kindergarten through 9th grade. And earlier I just gave you like the overall, the average of all the grade levels together. And so what this shows is that kindergarten, 9th grade, 2nd, 3rd, 7th, pretty much, well, kindergarten through 9th grade shows that 2nd, 3rd, 7th grade maintained the percent of students at benchmark from fall to winter. Kindergarten, 1st, 5th, 6th, and 9th show just a slight decrease in the percent of students at benchmark, and 4th and 8th grades show a slight increase. Just keeping in mind that at each window, the benchmark increases. And we're not seeing huge drops. And obviously, when we do see something, it's usually just a shift in a few kids that's causing that. And again, we're looking at all of the data by teacher, by grade level, to see what we need to do to support students. So that is math. And then for reading, with regard to the literacy scores, we still see that most are between 71 to 82% of our students are meeting the benchmark in the winter. And then just a reminder that the scores increase each testing season. We can see that 4th grade shows a slight increase, so does 2nd grade, 3rd grade, and 6th grade. 5th grade rate remained about the same, and then there's slight drops in 1st, 7th, 8th, and 9th. And again, we're working to identify those to see, where kids need help. But it just gives you the overall breakdown by grade level from fall to winter. And again, this is the percent of students meeting the benchmark. It's purple because we're the Blackhawks, so that's why it's purple. This is more of our disaggregated data. So this is A math, and this is the breakdown by group. So you can see all students in here, our district average that you saw earlier, 84% in the fall, 82% in the winter are meeting the benchmark. And then you can see how we're doing for all grade level groups. While the percent of students meeting the increasing benchmark is good, it's important to see each group individually. The percentage of students at benchmark or above and students, with IEPs, our white group, our Asian group remains similar from fall to winter. The Latinx group shows a slight increase. The ELL, the English language learners group, Black African American, students experiencing poverty see some decreases from fall to winter. The difference in the percent of students at benchmark is a drop. Also, I just wanted to point this out because I was looking at some of the data. It's actually a difference in the number of students tested. Like I was specifically looking at our Black African American and trying to understand why we went from 65 to 59, for example. I'm sorry. 55 to 48, sorry. I have to look at the groups. And what I'm noticing, it's such a small number of students in our district that tested that even just a few students in one grade level, for example, 5th grade, I was looking at, there was a drop in like 3 to 4%, and the reason why, it's literally because of 3 students. We had 3 less students test, and all 3 happened to be on track, and those students didn't test in the winter. I don't know if they moved out of district or what, and so that caused the drop. So it wasn't something we were doing, it was a drop in the number of students that actually tested that were on track. So like if we had 53 students in 4th grade test, or 5th grade that I was looking at, 53, then we had 50 tests in the winter. And those happened to be kids that were on track, so it dropped, right? So that's part of why we have data digs, at buildings and in grade level teams, so we can get to the why, so we know what to do about it. But I just wanted to explain that I've been looking at some of that. I also know, in particular, when I look at that group, I was trying to see, like, of that group, how many might be students experiencing poverty, or how many might be students with IEPs. And when I looked at the breakdown of the African American group in Black African American in 5th grade, I was noticing that 1/3 of them have IEPs. So they're getting the most intensive support possible, but want to, dig in with buildings, and that's part of our next steps that I'll talk about later is, okay, what else can we do, right, to support our students? So just some examples and the idea that we dig into the why. So that's math. And then if we take a look at literacy, literacy seems to be pretty stable from fall to winter. Like we're seeing, like not the drops that we saw in math for certain groups. Our district average was 80% in the fall. It's 80% in the winter. That's overall, and then we can see each individual group. Trying to see what else I wanted to point out. Right, the English language learner group saw an increase in the percent at benchmark. Obviously, we're using FastBridge to identify those additional children that need continued supports. And then our students with IEPs, obviously we're seeing like from 42 to 41% at benchmark. But again, those are the students getting the highest level when we look at tiers of support, like our multiple tiered systems of support model, that level 3 or student IEP, they're really getting the most support possible. So we got to continue working with our students and our teachers. This next section is really going to get down to the building level. So we did a wide district overview. We got down to the disaggregated data, and now we're getting into some building level data. I did want to bring up Wing Lake. I know that they do not use Fountas and Pinnell or FastBridge. They have their own assessments. Wing Lake is our center program. We get students from all over the county, and they support students with IEPs that have severe, like multiple physical challenges or severe cognitive needs. And so they're getting a lot of support at Wing Lake, and it's important that we not just look at our general education data, but also dig deeper into our students with IEPs as well, because they're part of our district. And we're here to support all kids. Wing Lake for math, hold on, I wrote it down. They use, from the Macomb ISD, they have a math assessment from there, and that's what they use. Rebecca Anders asked that I really point out to you that this is a 2-year average. I know last year they were experiencing a lot of students who were sick, and they are more susceptible to getting ill. And now this year, with more consistent instruction, kids are not as ill as much as they were last year or out of school, or teachers, that they're actually seeing from like last fall to now an increase in that assessment. It asks about 10 questions that are appropriate for students with IEPs at that level to see if they're making any gains with their learning. And so they're tracking that progress over there and really trying to support their students as well. And then the same trend with reading, where we're seeing some just over time, at least some increases. That particular assessment is called the Bridges Literacy Assessment, and it's used at other centers comparable to Wing Lake across our state, a similar assessment as well. And so we can see from the fall of last year, they went from 5.3 on average, that was the point scored on their assessment, to 5.59 this past winter. So wanted to share that with you as well. This one, I have every single building, but I'm just going to specifically talk about Conant because they're first. What you see here is the top left graph indicates the students that were at benchmark, at the benchmark expectation with FastBridge for the fall and the winter. So you can see at Conant, we had 84% of students with math at the benchmark in the fall, and in the winter we have 83%. Then with reading, which is the lower left-hand corner, in the fall they had 79% of students at benchmark, and then 81% in the winter. The graphs on the right are the Fountas and Pinnell that I was talking about, that one-on-one reading assessment. Again, grades 1 through 4 in the fall, and in the winter, as kids begin reading, we add in kindergarten. We can see that, let's see, I'm gonna check my notes real quick. We had about 83% of students meeting the expectation for Fountas and Pinnell in the fall, and the winter data shows us that about 88% of students are meeting the expectation for winter in grades K through 4 at that building. Sorry, just checking my notes, but I did talk about the assessment, so that's good. And sorry, just checking to see if there's anything else I wanted to share, but that's good. So what you have before you, right, is just the FastBridge and then the Fountas and Pinnell scores for fall and winter. And then as you move through your deck, you'll see the same thing provided for you for every single building. So I'm not going to go over every single building, but you have that before you so you can see how each building is doing. Keep in mind that, when you look at the middle schools, their data will be for their particular grade levels. So Fastbridge, again, is given K-9. So West Hills has grades 4 through 8, so that's what their data represents. And then for Fountas and Pinnell, which is the reading assessment, I mentioned to you earlier that it only goes K-5. So I pointed out to you that's for 4th and 5th because that's what West Hills has. So just pay attention to the grade levels at the middle schools. And then the high school, remember, they don't take Fountas and Pinnell because it only goes up to grade 5, so this is just 9th grade. So you can see how our 9th graders did at the high school with Fastbridge, reading and math. I think this is important additional data. I know it's not part of our benchmark data, but just every year when we give M-STEP as part of the 3rd grade reading law, we have to look at the students that are proficient with the 3rd grade reading assessment, the ELA assessment. And if students are not proficient, if they're below proficiency or not proficient, we are asked by the state to potentially retain those kids because of their M-STEP score, their M-STEP proficiency. I wanted to let you know that we did not have any students recommended for retention. Okay, so that's basically what this is telling you. 97% of our students met the expectation on M-STEP this past spring. We had 2.5 that were just recommended for additional support, so we're making sure we provide supports to those students. And then I know it says less than 1%, but we didn't have anybody that would be 0 recommended for retention. So it's just additional data to have. So what are some key takeaways from today? So, I mean, essentially, when we look at our overall district average, we have 80% or more of our students that are at least at benchmark. It should say for the middle of the year, not the end of the year, so ignore that. I will fix it. Keep in mind, as we look towards June, we know that there's going to be another higher expectation than there was this winter because the score benchmark increases. Our testing window just closed right at the end of January, just as teachers were also trying to finish final exams, report cards, things like that. We just finished compiling all of the data. We actually need time for all of our building teams to go back and review it. Our school improvement teams had a little bit of a preview of their data as they were pulling it because we were getting ready for our MyKit meeting around continuous improvement. But they actually need time to dig back with their building teams to really dig into the data to see what are our next steps and look at strategies that you're using across grade levels, departments, or at that site. And obviously with our teacher teams, our administrators, our coaches, English language development teachers, resource room teachers, they're all working together to analyze their data and understand each child's story, because there's always a story behind a student and what they're dealing with so that we can support them. Sometimes it might also be a social emotional need and not just an academic skill, and sometimes we have to piece those together to support a student. Obviously, as you can see, we have a high percentage of students, of all students meeting the benchmark, but we know there's still much work to do to close the opportunity gap for some of our students, student populations. But we are seeing successful results in terms of like MTSS, which is an expectation from MDE that we're implementing, looking at our data, using data study teams, and then providing supports to children at all tiers. So those are some key takeaways, some of the next steps. One of the things I'm working on in relation to the law, along with our whole learning services team and all of our administrators across the district and school improvement teams, is we create a continuous improvement report where it outlines literally everything that we're working on, all of the building strategies where they get into detail once they've looked at their data, and then it has all of their data. So it'll have their M-STEP data for the last 5 years. It will have their Fastbridge, so you can see like 3 years over time how we've been doing with this particular assessment. And then it's also broken down by group, so it's disaggregated. So you can see that for 3 years. So they have their strategies along with all of their data for literacy and math so that everybody can see it. It is made public, so it does go on our transparency dashboard. So that will be made public. This particular report will be made public on Tuesday on our dashboard so that everyone will be able to see it. And you can see what we're working on and then continuing to make strides towards June to support all of our students. Also, as part of the law, and we get this guidance from MESA, which is the Michigan Association of Intermediate School Administrators, but as part of the School Aid Act 98B, which I was presenting on, we also have a report that we fill out for the state, and that's also made public, so that will also go on our dashboard as well. And you will see actually matrix tables where it breaks down every single building by demographic, so you'll get further down into the data as well, so that will be made available to everyone. And again, by Tuesday, because we have until the end of the month. Some of the other things that we're working on, I just tried to highlight for you, right? I was mentioning that building teams need time to review. Our learning services team needs time to actually review with those building teams to see what they're working on, because it helps us think about where do we need more resources, where might we need more support, and then it also helps inform our MyKit process and what we're doing with our overall district strategies. We want our strategies to come from what our students need, right? It should be student-driven, student data-driven on where we can do better. So we need time to look at all of that, and then obviously we have a district multiple tiered systems of support. Part of the MDE process is that we have a team that works together to help align our buildings and what we're doing to support kids. So our leadership team across the district needs time to look at the data and what we're doing. And as always, we're going to continue to progress monitor all of our students and continue to support them the best way that we can. Okay. So that's the gist. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, we want to go around. We'll start with Siva. We'll start with Trustee Kumar.
All right, thank you. So I had a question on the method of testing. Is FastBridge basically multiple choice, or is it?
It's a variety of test items, very similar to our M-STEP. So kids might have a passage where they're reading some text and answering multiple choice questions. Sometimes they might have true, false. There might be a couple of short constructed response where they might have to quickly type something. There's also questions where they have to highlight information in a text. So I would say it's not the big variety like M-STEP, but it is similar in a way where there's like a variety of test items.
So is the test for any particular grade the same across the state, or is that something we or you in LST set for just the district?
So there's a variety of benchmark assessments to pick from. As I mentioned earlier, NWA was our previous benchmark assessment. And so we have chosen to use FastBridge because it's a little bit quicker for students to take. It's not as stressful, and it gives us like a quick sliver or snippet in time to see how a child is doing or a group of students is doing. But we selected FastBridge, and we love the reports that we can get. We love the fact that when it gives us that moment in time for a child that we can pull a menu to see, okay, this is saying this child needs help with these particular standards or these skills, and we get that report. We can also share some of that information with parents to say, yeah, I'm seeing this in the classroom too, and the report, this test is saying that this, and I might be seeing this in some of my assessments in the classroom. Let's focus on these skills so that we can work together to help your child bump up to the next level. So to answer your question, we picked FastBridge because we liked what it could do for us to best support our students and families. There are other districts around us that use FastBridge. Clarkston is one, Clarenceville's one, Lake Orion is another one. And so districts select what they think might work best for their system to get information and help students.
So would a third grade student in Clarkston get the same questionnaire that somebody at Bloomfield Hills would?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. But obviously the questions change and
Right.
adapt to each student.
Right.
But they would potentially get similar items, yes.
Okay. So I have a follow-up question on the Fontes and Pinal. You had mentioned it was an individual assessment by each teacher.
Mm-hmm.
How do we make sure they're uniform across schools, like our middle schools or elementary schools? How do we make sure they're consistent in their methodology?
Yep.
And grading across schools?
Yep, so we've done training with all of our teachers, and then we continue to try to do some norming with teachers as part of professional learning so that they're practicing and maybe even listening to a video recording of a student to see if they're recording their information and scoring it the same way. So it's just ongoing professional development to look at those and make sure that they're using like the rubric correctly and looking at students a similar way in the way that they record like their errors on the paper, right? There's a way of doing it. I know LaTanya, Reading Recovery, LaTanya Darling-Cole is our Reading Recovery teacher leader, but she's also done a lot of work across our district to train teachers on how to take running records accurately. So there's a lot of professional learning going on with that.
All right, thank you.
Trustee
Thank
Coleman.
you, Carrie.
Thanks, Carrie, for the data and the presentation. I have just a couple of questions. Looking at the FastBridge reading, so when we say 80%, but we say 52 are on track and 28% are low risk. So what does low risk mean? So we say 52% on track, so is that at grade level? And then what is defined as the 28% low risk? And why do we combine it to 80%?
Can you tell
I
me
do
which slide
believe
you're
he's
looking
on
at so that I can better answer your
Slides
question?
7 and 8.
Slides, is it 8? I guess it's 8.
It's the purple.
The purple, gray. So gray is 52, purple is 28. You combine it to say 80,
Correct.
but when we say low risk, and when we say 52% on track, is that at grade level? Is that,
The low risk is still students who are on grade level, who are right, like dead average, like at that 50th percentile.
so they're at grade level and that 52% is above grade level, or what does that?
Yeah,
represent?
similar to on M-STEP, you typically see that category as marked proficient and then exceeding. And so often if we think, if we're looking at either is meeting or not meeting grade level expectations, we would draw that line between the 28 and 14 and then combine that to make 80% as at grade level.
So
And then those,
so again, is the
Yeah.
52 above grade level, or if the 28% is at grade level, is the 52% above grade level to get this combined 80? Is that what we're saying?
Above grade level, yes.
yes.
Above? And so 20%, looking at it, are not at grade level.
So it doesn't mean they're not at grade level. So those kids, like when we look at the benchmark score, let's say, I don't know, in third grade math, we're looking at reading, so they have higher numbers. So let's say in third grade reading in the fall, they were supposed to be at 400, but they're at 395, right? They're still on grade level, right? It just means that they didn't hit that benchmark of 400 for that time of year, but they're still considered on grade level. There just might be one or two questions, one or two standards that they missed. And what Fastbridge says is that 14%, those are kids that might need some support with some of the standards
Because I guess
at that grade level.
if I'm a parent and and I don't know if it's broken down by student, and someone tells me my child's some risk, so you're saying they're at grade level, below, like, how do I try to define what that means to me?
Terminology, if we were to line up similar benchmark, because this is Fastbridge language for that, and then it's supposed to correlate to as a predictor for MSTEP. So with the 6% up there, that would be not proficient, 14% on the MSTEP, that would be labeled as partially proficient. And those two groups often make up the percentage of not at grade level. And then the 28% would be proficient on the MSTEP. And then the 52% would be exceeding expectations or
So 14%.
beyond,
So if I'm trying to, if I'm a parent looking
You're
at
at
this,
grade level.
if I'm at, 14%, someone's saying I'm partially proficient. So meaning, and I see some risk, so I would probably need support. Okay, so
correct. The 28% and the
Looking at-
52% would be,
I get,
At
I'm
grade
just
level.
trying to like, if I'm looking at this, someone says to me, I'm in this 14%, what it defines. And then a question, and you brought up, I think Siva asked it. So if because I don't know if 80% is good, right? So like a Clarkston or Lake Orion and those other Fastbridge, what are they at? Like, do we have comparisons to say if we're at 80, Clarkston's are they at 87? Are they at 89? Are they at 74? Because I know I've asked this in the past.
Fastbridge is not a statewide assessment, so we wouldn't have other district assessments, but what Fastbridge does have is they have their own national norms. And then that's what Carrie presented on, how are our students doing nationally, but we wouldn't have that specifically for other districts unless
What other
they,
districts use? You mentioned there's 3.
Right.
So what is,
They
Yeah,
wouldn't
but
be
there's not a-
sharing that
there's not a
information
data
out.
so we can't compare, because I don't know if I look at 80% that are at, I'm saying a class of 20, 20% or 4 are,
well, I think your question is, Paul, do we have data assessment benchmarks that we can compare to other schools in Oakland County? Absolutely. Is FastBridge one of those? Not necessarily. Could we do that if we developed into a partnership and we were exchanging personal data back and forth for students? There's a possibility that we would be able to do that, but I'm not sure that we have a need beyond the assessments that we already have to be able to do those county comparisons. And with FastBridge, we're able to do like a national comparison to know whether or not we're moving into the outcomes that we prefer. For FastBridge, what it really helps us do is it helps us triangulate data from these different assessments. Because some of the assessments are, like the Fontes and Pinnell, there's a lot of different individuals delivering the Fontes and Pinnell. And that is something that teachers are doing, and you can get a little bit of discrepancy between one teacher and another teacher. We usually don't see wide differences between that, but what FastBridge helps us do is put those comparisons next to Fontes and Pinnell, and then it gives us confidence in the Fontes and Pinnell because we're able to see those correlations, because this isn't going to have those variances between one classroom and another classroom. So it really helps us have high levels of confidence in some of the other data pieces.
I guess my question, if FastBridge is going to say, yes, you know, the average district should be at around 80, and we're at 80, I don't know, right? We look at ourselves probably not as the average district. So I don't know if that's good, you know, or that's bad as Bloomfield. You know, it's good on a national scale, but, you know, I'm trying to leverage us against like districts to see if an 80% number of on track is good.
FastBridge is used to help individual students, whereas MSTEP is like an assessment that you can compare to other districts. So when we compare to other districts, we use MSTEP because everyone in the state uses that.
FastBridge is a screener.
But we don't use MSTEP anymore. We use
No,
No, we use both.
We use-
So
Yeah, so Carrie, if we go back to the other slide, is it possible we could look at it a little differently and maybe by growth in
Which other slide, Pat?
the last one that we were on? No. No. Keep going.
Just
Slide
looking at-
number?
But this is a
Yeah. Let's
Right here?
stop here for a
Okay.
minute. So Carrie, is it possible we could look at this more so from a growth standpoint? And would it be flat growth, modest, typical, and aggressive? So if I'm looking at the red, those are our students who are kind of making flat growth. Is that correct?
So I would have to pull up a different graph for you. This
Okay.
particular graph is just the percent at benchmark or not.
Got it.
Right?
Thank you.
So, and what FastBridge says, and remember, this is the purpose of this assessment is a universal screener to see who might need support. That's the purpose of this. And, right, they say what the cut scores are based on the national average, right? And we have 80% of our students, like all of the purple, doesn't matter if it's low risk or on track, they're saying 80% of our students are at the benchmark or higher. That's what that's saying. And then the 14%, those are the kids that are just below that benchmark cut score, but it doesn't mean they're not on grade level. It just means there's 14% of our students that might need some support. But we have to look at that data and then compare that to Fontes and Pinnell, compare it to classroom unit assessments in math and Envision Math or any formative assessments the teacher's using, because we can't just say that one data point is it. We have to look at it with other data points to say, okay, yep, this particular group of students needs support. They're just supposed to help us identify who those students are, right? Like, and it also ensures that the teachers are using those other assessments in the classroom in comparison with that to see, okay, how are my kids doing nationally? How are my kids, like, I don't want to say, but just who might need support in the classroom and what might need these support with. It's almost like a catch-22 where, like, we just want to make sure that we're not missing any kids, right? It's almost like, I don't want to say a fail-safe, but like, we just want to make sure we're catching the kids and we're not missing anybody that might need support.
Right. Could help us identify students who potentially need additional support.
Yeah.
And
This
then-
doesn't
Yep.
show growth, right? But if I was to look at our growth report, which I could get to you from FastBridge, but when I look at, you know, the growth, right? Like who's making like no growth, or flat growth, who's making some growth, who's making typical growth for a kid in this age at this grade level compared to the nation, or who's making aggressive growth, the median number is 80% for our district. So that means if we were to rank order our kids, the middle number is 80. 80% of our kids are making typical to aggressive growth in this district. Regardless of the percentage of students at benchmark or not, We have a huge chunk of our kids making aggressive growth from whatever benchmark level they're starting from.
Then my only, shifting to Fontes, the only question there is, looking at buildings, so I see a big jump between Conant and Way and Eastover and Lone Pine. Like I see exceeds expectations. We go from, I guess, this high 60s to like 58, and then like Lone Pine, I see the lowest 55, and one of them is there a reason behind the data that you've analyzed? Do we have more English language learners in Lone Pine? I'm trying to understand why the difference between the buildings.
We don't necessarily want to say it's based on one data point, so let's maybe refrain from saying that too.
Yeah, it's one data point, but yeah, that's where buildings need to go in and analyze like their data and how they're doing, right? Like I can just make like some hypotheticals right now, but I need to actually talk to the teachers and look at the data with them to see what's happening. But
That's a good point.
you know, especially, I mean, they're a K3 building and Way's a K4 building, so you have to remember that we're looking at K4 at one building, at K3 at another. There's a different set of teachers, a different set of student population. They have a smaller number of students at Lone Pine versus Way, say, for example, and so those factors also matter.
I'm not, all I'm saying is the data was presented to me, and I'm looking at it, and I see a jump of 13 points from building to building. And
No,
I'm
that's a
just-
fair question,
And I'm just
so-
asking the question. I mean,
Yeah,
if the
that's-
data's there,
I
I'm
can
going to
answer
ask that.
Yeah, and remember, from fall to winter, the kindergarten is added in. They're just beginning to learn how to read, and so that could also be impacting their data. But we do typically see increases across time, across a year with reading, because that's what teachers are like focused on with small group instruction, individualized instruction, conferring with students, doing those running records, to see like a high percentage of students meeting or exceeding the benchmark expectation with reading.
Also within Carrie's description, I think is worth mentioning is, and Paul, you reference, if I have this data in front of me, it prompts good questions. And behind this is these tools and the metrics that you're looking at this evening were not part of any type of comprehensive balance assessment system more than 5 years ago. These tools are relatively new, and the way that we're speaking about processes have grown quite a bit, substantially, over the last few years. And so our ability to look at data in this way has significantly grown. To be able to have this breakdown, to be able to look, to be able to triangulate data. Even the example that Carrie gave is, well, it provides me the opportunity where I can be working with a building or a grade level, or even a classroom teacher, or with a family. So it really extends a lot of possibilities in how we're responding to students. Again, and most particularly for FastBridge, it really is about a screening tool, that we're checking in on kids and we're able to forecast, okay, are we going to be where we need to be come May and June? That's our target. Are we on track? Or within this data set, are there students that we need to be more concerned about? Or as we move in and review those plans for our students, we see, okay, we have plans in place. We are, some of these students are already seeing an interventionist or learning specialist, that some of those pieces are built in. And then when not, then we know, okay, now we have to go through another intervention cycle, with the goal always being that those students don't stay in intervention long-term, that we figure out what is the component that is missing, we try to build that back in, and then we go through another assessment cycle like this where we're triangulating this data, trying to figure out how do we deploy our Tier 2 and Tier 3 intervention models and for whom. So it helps us do that. So, to reiterate what Carrie is talking about is these tools weren't even present, just more than a handful of years ago. So it's really helping us out be more comprehensive and be more responsive.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I can.
Trustee Noble, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I just had a question about page 9 and 10. For the 0 to up to 29th percentile for those bottom group of students, I'm really impressed by how many students have done so well, but I always worry about the students that fall through the cracks. So I'm just curious, do those students get IEPs, or are they pinpointed to get more help in some way?
Yeah.
They're that far behind?
Yeah, so we have processes, right? Obviously, the data will help us catch any kids that might need support because it'll tell us, right, who needs support. But then also we have child study meetings that we do where by law, teachers are required to provide intervention for students. And we get to that point where they've tried something, now they've worked with an interventionist or specialist to get more support, and they're just not making enough growth or slow growth. Right, a child would go to the child study team to see if there's anything else we can brainstorm, because before we get to a read meeting, which is where, like a review of existing evaluation data, we're looking at their whole data history and the interventions that have been provided to that student. Before we move forward with the read, we have to show that there's been interventions in place for that student before we're reviewing that data and saying, you know, we might need to do some further testing, this child might need an IEP. So we actually have to sign and check those boxes, and then we go down and do some further, like, digging deeper testing, and then have a MET report to go over all of the assessment data that our special education team has done to say, you know, whether this child needs an IEP or not. So they're getting support along the way, and the level, intensity, and frequency of the support increases over time when we see that child is making, like, slow to no growth, right? We're trying to figure out what else is going on here. There's also phone calls to the parents or conferences with the parents to go over the data and look at it all along too, so that the parents are informed along the way as well.
One of the reasons why that's such a great question is because when reviewing a balanced assessment model or framework, you're really looking for, does it give us the ability to be nimble and responsive to students within a reasonable amount of time? And what is the flexibility where a grade level can be responsive to be able to be progress monitoring a building, and then also at the district level, each sort of moving different pieces to be responsive in a different layer of support. So that's a great question to talk about. Okay, so then what happens when students are coming into some of those high risk factors? Is there an IEP in place, a 504, or some type of accommodation plan, or are they already involved in a Tier 2 intervention? And then also what's happening in the classroom with Tier 2 interventions as well, which could be push in or pull out. But with those, with a balanced assessment platform, you're really looking for, does it make us flexible and nimble in our ability to be responsive to whatever the student's needs are?
Well, it sounds like it's really helpful in that way, and it's commendable that you switched to this way of testing people 3 years ago or so.
Yeah.
And I just had one other question, a really quick one, about page 14. And I noticed that for second grade and third grade, there was some good growth there, and I was wondering if you could attribute that to a teacher possibly, or anyone in particular that might have been really good at their job, possibly? Sometimes those teachers make a big difference.
Yeah, so this is the average of all the second grades across the district, or the average
okay.
of all the third grades across the district. But I think there's so many factors that go into that percent proficient or percent at benchmark. I mean, obviously we could look and attribute it to a teacher, but we would want to look at, like, where are the students needing the most help, and what resources can we provide so that all of our kids are making that typical to aggressive growth.
We see less variance as we go up in grade because the expectation for what students have retained in the fall is greater as you move up in grade. So with the lower grades, we do sometimes expect to see variance because we also, you know, sometimes it's helpful to remember that those are two different tests too. So it's not the same first grade assessment given twice, but it's the expectations of a first grader when they're coming in fresh in September, which can be pretty varied, to, okay, and now here's the expectation mid-year for that assessment. So sometimes we do see a little bit more variance, but what's in these numbers that isn't necessarily being presented tonight is we're also able to forecast from the growth that we're seeing between fall and winter. And then as we compare this to previous years, and then when Carrie and I sat down to do that, we're finding that the results that you're looking at right now are stronger than the last 2 years. So what that is suggesting is because we've probably have been building upon two different things over the last few years. One is a vertical and horizontal alignment with our curriculum, but the other one has also been responding to the impact of COVID. And so what we're probably still seeing is kids moving out of some of those negative impacts and growing to the potential that our curriculum provides. And so when we reviewed all of these benchmark data sets, we're finding that they are stronger than the last couple of years that we've had, which also within the last couple of years, because we always do this about this time, because we're wondering, because it's a good predictor of, okay, so where, what should we be forecasting for MSTEP scores come spring? Are we going to be about the same? Do we look like we might be declining a little bit? Are we expecting to increase? So I'm certainly not going to make any promises, but these data sets look stronger than they did last year, and last year we saw an increase in the spring based on that comparison. So these results that we're looking at in the winter right now are stronger than last winter, a year ago.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Noble. Trustee Hill?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment that, I can tell you as a parent in the district how it's been valuable to watch this data throughout the years and the progress, and that's helpful. And so one of the things I like about it is there is a subjectivity to it to some degree because you're tailoring it to each student. And again, to Trustee Kumar's point, despite the amount of training you can give employees, there's still going to be some nuances in how it's delivered, but that's what you take with when you're trying to make it more tailored for each student. So I understand that, but you had made a comment earlier about how if we wanted to compare data to more purely objective data to other students in other Oakland County schools, for instance, what would be the tool that the district is utilizing internally that would have a more objective component
The most readily available in order to take a look at like a program review where you're looking at some lag measures are really for the MSTEP K-8. That's most readily available if you want to put that up against other like schools. Some of these other data components, when I refer to triangulate the data, so we know that each one of those assessments are sort of pulling their weight or that they're calibrated into what we expect. That might be FastBridge, MSTEP, and Fontes-Sempionnel.
Okay.
So if we're seeing correlations between all three of those assessments, what it's telling us is that those are all reliable data sets. Now that doesn't always mean that they're reliable for each in particular student, but the data sets that we're looking at right now are averages of hundreds of students. And so, and that's also important to do for each individual student because sometimes we can dig into the FastBridge data here and go, oh, we have somebody that's at risk, but then when we're reviewing an MSTEP score and the Fontes-Sempionnel, we find out, oh, actually they're pretty strong. And plus we have the teacher's observations. Okay, and that doesn't happen very often, but it allows us to calibrate those other assessment tools, such as Fontes-Sempionnel. So if we're not seeing a lot of variance when we triangulate those three data points, and we know, okay, we're calibrated pretty good with how we're delivering that assessment.
Got it.
And then the MSTEP gives us that assurance because then we can go through and then stack that up against other districts in the county. And then what we've seen is for ELA, I believe last year, I think it was every grade level for ELA is that right? Every grade level or every grade level but one, where for ELA we had the top score in the county. And then math, I think we had 2 out of the 6 top scores in the county, which is more than the district has ever had previously. So we're definitely trending in the right direction, and we're seeing the frequencies of those scores and benchmarks continuing to increase. And so what's positive this evening is these results are stronger than last winter. So will that hold up in the spring when we're taking the MSTEP and we can do another comparison? We'll have to wait and see, but if we're forecasting the weather, and it's not always correct, right now it seems to suggest that we are continuing to see growth in some of those outcomes.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Hill. Trustee Fowler?
I appreciate the presentation. That was helpful to go over things. I mean, this is, I think, we've talked about, as a board, needing to be educated more on all of the assessments, whether they're state assessment, diagnostic tools, whatever it is, so that we can understand it, so that when we see data, we know what it means and we can understand it better. I have a lot of questions that I've taken note of, so I'm not going to go through all of them. I'll send them to you separately. But the relevant ones, in F&P, would this be potentially where we may see an impact if we introduce the phonics program that is on the superintendent's goal list? Would we be able to see an impact in terms of F&P performance? Would that be a consistent thing we'd see every year, or just one time we might see this, overall growth across those grade levels K through 3?
We started to both nudge each other to get to the microphone, but go ahead. Yeah, we're both eager to answer that.
No, definitely, that would be the assessment where we would see a difference, right? So if the phonics program is working as intended, and we're seeing kids growing, we would see it in Fountas and Pinnell. They'd be doing better at their word accuracy, at their reading level, and so we would see higher levels, kids moving faster through higher levels of reading.
Okay.
Based on that assessment. So we would see the outcome in the Fountas and Pinnell
And would it
assessment.
be a one-time thing when we put the program into place the first time,
No.
or we expect every year once
Over
they
time.
reach that? Okay, got it. Perfect. So we'd brought that up before, is where would,
Yeah.
not that we have to have a metric to it, but doing that, how could we see a change? More of a comment, but just back to the disaggregated data changes. And I know you gave, and it's not a critique specifically with this, I know you gave an explanation for why, specifically with Black African American group, why we see that. But I think this speaks to a bigger picture thing where we see it, we say we have to do better, but this is a hard place to make those kinds of larger changes. And I think this just harkens to the point that we've had, in terms of thinking through goals. That is an area where we need to talk about disaggregated performance in those groups. What can we do at a bigger level? Because just saying we didn't do well, with F&P or A-Math or whatever it be for these groups, it may not be enough time to make those kind of changes. I think we need to take a step back and say, how do we increase this performance holistically for these groups? So just a comment on that. And then, if we introduce multi-tier systems of support, so whether it's for a student or an entire grade or a class rather, how do we see an impact of that? Is it the next assessment? How do we know that MTSS countermeasure worked?
Right, so we would see that. So if a student's in intervention, right, or getting support in reading recovery or level literacy intervention or something, right, we would see that because the teachers or the interventionists are progress monitoring. They're either using some of their own formative assessments, they're using running records and reading recovery, sight word assessments. We would see it in Fountas and Pinnell as well. We would see a difference in our FastBridge scores. But in FastBridge, there's also, I would say standard-based measures that they can use, right, where they can progress monitor the student over time. So FastBridge recommends particular assessments in the system with a particular intervention to our interventionists, and then the interventionists are using those assessments weekly to see, is the child making the expected growth rate to catch back up?
Okay.
And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you also meant literally, how would the board know that we're seeing an impact in these intervention models? So did you want to just quickly talk about, now that we have these tools in place, the type of progress monitoring we'll be leading our interventionists and learning specialists into, in terms of viewable reports? Or maybe I actually just said it right there.
I know that we put an MTSS in, we do something, obviously. It's not like we're not doing anything, but how do we measure how well those countermeasures are working? Do we have any kind of, metric that says, across these grade levels, we had X number of students that required some sort of support. Here are the things we use. Here are the things that work great. It got all the students up to where they need to be. Here's the things where we still lagged after introducing a countermeasure. What do we do next, or do we need to review what we used?
Yes, and we're getting, yes, and because as part of our trial study, we're also getting closer to having more of a district view into specifically for those intervention models, and what are the results after 6 weeks. And particularly the new configuration is going to significantly help us with that, because then we'll also have all of our programming in schools in, even looking at Fountas and Pinnell, it makes a difference if you're a K-4 building versus a K-3
Sure.
building, and it shows up in your data. It impacts, it's one of the reasons why we aren't frequently getting blue ribbon for our elementary schools, because most elementary schools in the state of Michigan are K-5, and the state only assesses at grades 3 through 5. So it actually hinders both our middle schools and elementaries when we are competing for those blue ribbons. I would suspect in our new configurations, we're going to see those more frequently because our data sets will now be comparable and not just one of 3 grades, but rather 3 of the 3 grades in comparison to like schools. So we're expecting that to go up as well. But with that, I think we'll be better resourced to be able to put before you this intervention. Here's how many kids went through it. Here are the outcomes of that.
Right.
And sometimes an outcome can be moving into a more intensive type of intervention, perhaps an IEP, or an outcome out of that could be they're back at grade level and have graduated out of the intervention model that we had them at. So those outcomes could be in both ways, and we're getting closer to be able to have that available for you to be
Okay.
able to review regularly.
Perfect. All right. That's everything I have.
Thank you, Trustee Fella. Trustee VanGemert?
I've got a couple of questions. First one is with regard to the first and second grade. I believe it's the Fastbridge, pages 13 and 14. Are those typically lower than the other grades in past years for our district and nationally as well? Are those, I guess, if you
Can you say those grades again? real quick?
the first and second grade. So when you look at first and second grade, you'll see that
Yeah.
there, we've got 80s across the board, except for those grades are kind of in the 70s or 60s. Like, is that typical, or is that this year?
I would say it is typical, like even just nationally, and even when we gave NWEA, for whatever reason, we always saw a little bit of a dip in the winter in K and 1. And my guess at this point is that's typical because, like, how do I explain this? It takes a while for kids to get those foundational skills in literacy, for example, right? Like once they know their sounds, not only do they have to know their sounds, but now they have to integrate them into words. Like they have to know that when they see B-A-T, it goes B-at to make bat, right? Like there's still a lot of processing integration that's happening in K and 1. And even through those first few reading levels, they have to know so many sight words. They begin trying to learn their phonics so that they can phonetically sound out a word or learn other reading strategies. And so we do, like because they're still learning how to read and that processing is still happening with young children, we typically we see the most growth in K and first in the spring. Like first grade has the most reading levels to get through from the beginning to end of the year. The beginning part of the year seems slower because they're still learning how to read. And the second half of the year, once they know how to read and they're starting to read at higher levels and they know more sight words, they begin to take off. Like that's when typically, I would say even across the nation, that's when we see the biggest growth with first graders is from winter to spring.
Sure. I was looking
I
at the
think-
Fastbridge data, but that's.
Well, in addition to that, I think that's a good observation, and I think part of the original question is that typical? Do you usually see that in there? And we do, but not once we get to second grade and above. Those should be more in line with each other. But for our 5 and 6-year-olds, those are really two different assessments. The assessment they take in the fall is different than the one in the winter. And the expectations of a 5-year-old coming into a kindergarten room are lower than the expectation that you would see on an assessment in the winter. However, that winter and the spring assessment are going to be fair comparisons. So by the time you put the winter one, by the time you put the spring assessment up there for kindergarten, you can almost think of that as an orange, apple, and first grade that was an orange test, and then the winter and the spring are fair comparisons because the expectations of the 5 and 6-year-olds coming in to school in the fall are a little lower, so we'll see better assessments on that because the rigor of that assessment isn't quite the same, where now, once you get into second grade and above, now that really is more of an assessment for kids just coming in and, we're seeing where you're at and then we're going to progress monitor. So We do typically see that. We saw that on the former assessment platform that we had too, and then those are similar to national trends. And we think that's just a calibration of what 5- and 6-year-olds should be able to expect coming in. And then once we get to the winter and spring, that those assessments are fair comparisons to each other, which is probably why we see a lot of growth, because there's probably not a lot of difference between those two assessments.
My second question relates to the disaggregated data that's on 15 and 16. I know there was mention of a third of the Black and African American students having IEPs. I understand that mathematically, let's say you had 30 kids, 10 of them, a third is 10, right? Well, even when we look at this data, half the kids with IEPs that would be 5, right? That's with the IEPs, about 50% are proficient. And then the average for all students is around 80. So 80% of the remaining 20 is 16. You still come up to 31. That's 70%. So to me, my question related to that then is, what are we doing as a district to identify why there's that disparity? And then what are we doing to assist or change to eliminate that disparity?
So when I brought that up, I had a feeling you were going to ask that question, which is why I just dug into a couple grade levels in particular to try to get at some of that. But really, right, part of this is drilling down with our child study. It's also drilling down with the grade level teams who know those kids and know what's happening with them and how they're being supported. And so we're trying to collect that information from them and look at it as an MTSS team, like what are we doing for all kids and how can we best support our certain groups when we see this kind of data. So there's still work to do around that. And I know our buildings are working on strategies around that and how we best support all groups too. So.
I guess, not a question for you, Mrs. Crocker, but in general, I'd like to have someone indicate to us kind of what are we doing, as opposed to like we're doing stuff.
Yeah.
Like what is it that we're doing and what have we identified as a possible reason and how are we working to make that reason not exist anymore, I guess.
Yeah, and I really appreciate being able to attend the last MyKit meeting because that was a window into how we come together as a district and building teams to constantly review and then also try to make adjustments, whether that's mid-year or the larger adjustments, which we'll be talking about, I believe at the next study session where we're really looking at mathematics and our programming around our middle school. So sometimes those strategy come in large moves, and sometimes they are part of our integrated response where we are constantly trying to use this in a diagnostic way so that we can make appropriate adjustments and try to continue to support students. So thank you for attending that MyKIP. That was a window into how we come together to review a lot of this data to see what some of those mid-year adjustments might look like. And then at our next study session, we'll be able to look at a couple larger topics too, a little bit more in-depth, that will be accompanied with, okay, what was trending data from the past, where are we now, and what are we hopeful to move towards in the future?
And then one other area that I thought that we could improve upon, or that should be an area that we should try to figure out, is the students experiencing poverty. And my question related to that is, how does FastBridge define a student that's experiencing poverty? Is it the same as MSTEP? Is there a different?
Yeah, so students experiencing poverty includes a few different categories. It includes students who receive free and reduced lunch. It includes homeless students. It includes students who might be doubled up in another home. It might also include students with parents who are incarcerated as well. So they're identified by a few different categories. Mostly free and reduced lunch, but it does include those other categories as well.
Okay. Almost said, thank you.
Thank you, Trustee VanGemert. So not to belabor this conversation regarding slides number 15 and 16, but I just want to say this. FastBridge, from what I understood your explanation, is that when the student takes the assessment, then we follow the student to see what appropriate assessments or interventions are necessary. So I guess I'm still trying to understand for the population that we continue to see below 70% on most of our assessments. If we have an assessment that's identifying where there is a gap, why hasn't the gap closed? So I'm really trying to understand why we haven't really pinpointed what's necessary to move the needle for this population of students. So, I mean, I'm don't know if there's a real answer, but I think that it's really important for us to really try to step back and evaluate if we're using the tool at its maximum level to really help us to address what's needed for that individual student to move them from being in a section of not meeting the benchmark to at least meeting their grade level benchmarks. So I guess I'm still trying to, I would love to see what we're going to be doing, because one of the things you also made a point was that there is a lot of students that could also be already receiving some of those high tier level supports. So once a student's at that level, what are we doing additionally to support that population of students?
Right, so I mean, our highest level would be students with IEPs, right? So they're getting the most intensive support, and obviously, the teachers, the students, the resource room teachers are progress monitoring those students regularly, at least weekly, to see how they're doing with the interventions that they're providing. The dilemma with students with IEPs, it depends on what their IEP is for, right? Sometimes it might also be speech. Sometimes it might be a cognitive impairment. Sometimes it might be they're deaf and hard of hearing and they really need to build their oral language. And so the interventions are focused on what the child needs. And I would say it's the same at that next higher. If they're not at a level where they're getting an IEP, they're trying to get the most intensive support. So if it's reading recovery or something like reading recovery, our interventionists are meeting with students 5 days a week for 30 minutes or more, and then trying to track how that child is doing with that particular intervention. So when I say they're getting the highest level of support with an expert teacher, right, who's trained and master, like I would even say a master teacher, trying to support them, we're trying to give them the utmost. And if they're a child who needs wraparound support, like they need social work because there's social and emotional issues, there might be a processing issue or an issue with like dyslexia or dysgraphia where they have trouble writing and doing things, then we're trying to provide Orton Gillingham, we're trying to provide a level literacy intervention to address their reading, we're trying to provide social work support. So, and sometimes students have 504s in place for that, but we're trying to diagnose what a student needs and then trying to provide all those services as we're going down the road. So whether they have an IEP or not, we're trying to give them all those services here.
So what about the 2/3 of the students that don't have the IEP?
What I'm saying is we're still providing those kids support.
I think that's a great question. We would be able to put together a presentation and bring the board into what some of those pieces are, because it also depends on which layer you're referring to in terms of like what's being done. Some of it is at the diagnostic level with intervention support, but then sometimes some of it is also, I can't remember, somebody was asking about a word study program. Sometimes it comes in a word study program because we know that when we have programming faults or inconsistencies, the students most negatively impacted will be those who are most vulnerable. And so it's important for us to have those comprehensive vertical and horizontal alignment for us to be able to build our programming into. So sometimes what that intervention looks like or what that strategy looks like, it looks like installing a balanced assessment platform so that we'd be able to engage as a district, be able to dig down and see what moves and adjustments need to be made next. Sometimes it comes in, okay, the next move for ELA at K-5 is now really addressing the inconsistencies in a word study program because we've gone quite an extensive time without having vertical and horizontal alignment that is just resourced based on what a grade level can pull together, and there's a lot of inconsistencies there. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's adopting a math program, so we have a consistent programming platform, and that we're not significantly using teachers paid teachers for our math curriculum, that we have something in place. So it depends on the layer of which we're looking at in terms of like how you might answer a question like that of like, what are we doing? I try to put a few taglines onto that of like, sometimes they're big moves, referencing that it comes in the form of curriculum changes. It comes in the form of assessment platforms. It comes through reconfiguring our schools. It comes through investing in our students' environments in the classrooms. It comes in the form of restoring our K-5 buildings. It comes in the form of having 2 middle schools and not having programming threatened because we don't have enough kids to be in a world language class. So sometimes they're really big moves that the board is helping us drive significantly, and then sometimes it moves all the way down to, okay, at this grade level, here are a set of students that are struggling. What are the tier 2 and tier 3 intervention models that we can have in place? And then our collective response to that is, okay, are we resourcing our buildings in a way that's making them nimble and responsive to address some of those predictable outcomes that we're really trying to fight against? So sometimes those moves come in like these different layers depending on what lens we're looking through, and we'd be able to put that together and bring that forward so you could peer into that from like these different pieces. And then also, where can the board sit within that? Because oftentimes it's those really big moves that we want to be able to put up as a next step or the next direction that we should take. And then by partnering together, we put something in place and we continue to see improvements along the way. An example is that we're coming into the final year of our K-5 math program, and we'll be studying that quite significantly next year of what that looks like. We'll be vetting different types of curriculum programs, and we'll be trying to make a very wise choice for the next 5 to 6 years for the implementation of a math platform as well. And that would be something that we would be partnering together on. We'll provide you a lot of information, what we're seeing. So sometimes they're in that category, and then sometimes they're at a level of, okay, what's the response rate in the classroom? And so what we can try to do, be a little bit better on, is combining those topics together so they don't sound like they're siloed out as separate initiatives, but rather, okay, here's how those pieces interact with each other and start to develop a path forward for us.
For some of the items that you've identified as being obstacles for our African American students to, or this population according to this particular chart for the Fontans, for the FAST Bridge, are there other things that other districts are using for best practices for any population of students to help in moving them forward? Are there other best practices that we can maybe model or bring into our district to help all of our students, but that could definitely benefit the students that are performing a little bit at a different level than our all student population average?
Absolutely. There's always people that we could learn from, and we are part of a national organization where we're trying to share resources. We do typically try to scour for data sets that might outmatch ours. K-8, this is K-8 data that we're looking at right here. Sometimes that's hard to come by because our subgroups in these demographic areas do outscore other district subgroups, so sometimes it's hard to find some of the districts where we would peer into to try to see, okay, what's the variance between your programming and our programming? And but we're constantly looking for that. We're constantly looking for the opportunity to see. Well, generally in education, we are. Well, you would probably know this, Michelle. We are good thieves when it comes to ideas and educational strategies. So we do that quite well. We're always looking for some of those ideas that we might not be hanging on to yet.
Yeah, I always appreciate Carrie and Carrie's presentations and all the data.
Yes, yeah.
All right, well, I do have other things, but they're not pertinent that I can't email you. But thank you. Did anybody else have anything else? We close out the presentation. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Get the other thing up, yeah.
All right. All right, let me move on to the next item. All right, so board business. Request to adopt Bloomfield Hills School new courses and course changes for the 2023-24 school year. We have Sarah Furman, our Director of Secondary Education. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, how are you?
Can I have a motion?
I move the Board of Education approve the addition, removal, or revision to Bloomfield Hills High School course offerings for the 2023-24 school year as follows and as pursuant to Board Policy 3001. New courses, Small Business Creations, Principles of Marketing. Second course, Advanced Placement Pre-Calculus. Third course, IB Math SL Analysis and Approaches. New course, Name and Description, Business and Personal Law, which was previously Civil, Criminal, and Contract Law. Film and Composition, A Technical Perspective, which was previously Film and Composition 1. Film and Composition, A Social Perspective, which is previously Film and Composition 2. Course removal for 3 courses, Fitness Mix. Second course being Small Business Creations Technology. Third course being Small Business Creations for Engineering.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. It's been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
I just have just a question.
Trustee Colvin?
Sarah, you know, in the background, for the 2 new courses, you gave a rationale.
The 2 math ones, sorry.
The 2 math ones,
Yep.
you said IB Math 1 year from, remove honors pre-calc, replace it with AP pre-calc. What's the difference between what just on that rationale, the AP pre-calc versus honors? What's the major difference?
The major difference is basically that AP pre-calc will be more recognized by colleges. The issue with honors in terms of high schools, any high school can call any class honors. There's no standard, there's nothing else. Having it be AP pre-calc establishes the standard so that when they're looking at the transcript, they know what the standard is that means. So AP pre-calc would give the same student the same grade elevation, I guess is the best way to phrase it, as honors does, but it actually gives it a national recognition versus a local recognition.
And then the IB Math, there is there a rationale?
There is a rationale. So currently, right now, those IB-SL math students are in the honors pre-calc class, so that curriculum matched up. Now, the AP pre-calc does not match up as well with the IB math analysis and I always say it wrong, the Math SL course. So to separate those 2 out allows those students to continue on both those paths without having it be a conflict. Not even a conflict, but just it's easier to teach that way. And it allows the students in the IB class to actually fulfill all of the IB requirements in junior year and senior year versus waiting until all senior year and putting it all on them in senior year.
And then the removal of, and I was looking at the rationale for engineering. I know feedback is we don't have enough engineering, specific.
We are replacing that with, we are going down a different professional studies type path, but that class, we're just removing it so that when we put the next one in, they don't become in conflict on the course card. Is essentially what it is. That class will come on, not this fall, but next fall.
Okay, the Small Business Creations and Engineering?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, that's fine.
Any other questions?
Actually, to better answer that, it always takes me a minute, we are actually trying to align better to CTE standards. And what was the description of that small business creation technology did not align to the CTE standards. The new course will.
And then I did notice, which was good, in the business and, the first rationale to be more in line with DECA standards.
Yes.
And CTE. I mean, is down the road, are we looking to create a DECA type class like they
Yes.
do at West Bloomfield?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Trustee Coleman.
I mean, I saw, I mean,
No,
Right.
just for background for everyone in the room, there is challenges between credentialing, certification, and course content. And so now we have actually all three of those aligned, that we're able to do that. So getting the right personnel in place, so now we can run that out.
I'll go, I guess. Of course, I have to ask this question. What is the difference between the business and personal law? Is it just the description and the
It
civil
allows us to
criminal?
better align to what could possibly be a credentialed law CTE.
Okay.
So
What does that mean exactly?
So credentialing, so what will happen is once we become credentialed, so we have to have our staff be credentialed, but then the students can also be credentialed, which means that they would actually earn credits, possibly towards college or for a post-secondary career. So CTE is career and technical education. We are focusing a lot more on the career side of that. We have our lovely Oakland schools that offers an unbelievable technical education, so we're looking more towards that career type path. So changing that name and changing the course description allows us to better align as we move down the line towards credentialing. So it's kind of, the ask this year was for teachers in those types of core professional areas to go through and look at what would we need to do to become credentialed and do the first step of realigning our titles and our course descriptions along with the content for next year. And then we can build into credentialing because you have to demonstrate that before you can apply for credentialing.
Okay.
There's always 5 steps, to everything. So this is step 1 and 2.
Then with CTE, there'll also be additional funding that's available to the district as well.
Yeah.
We like that.
And honestly, it helps for seniors who want to do a capstone project internship to show that they're credentialed to get an internship that is aligned to their passion.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
That sounds really exciting. Any other discussion? All right, call the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And, in the fall, I will bring back just a quick report to tell you what the enrollment were in those classes, just so you can see how those
Okay.
changes actually have impact.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Thank you, sir. All right, so item B, request to approve Bloomfield Hills draft for the Recreation Master Plan. Pat Watson, Siva, can I get a motion?
Do we need to get approval to modify the motion, or?
Yes.
I move that we modify the motion to read. I move the Board of Education to approve the draft Recreation Master Plan as presented. And I also move the Board of Education task the administration to make the necessary corrections and repost the revised draft plan by March 2nd, 2023.
What are the corrections besides the loss or spelling?
Is there a second? There's a motion on the table. Is there a second?
Well,
Second.
I'm just curious,
Second.
before we second something, what are
Then we
the?
have a discussion, and then we
okay.
vote to not carry it or not. So now you can talk about it.
Yeah, no, I was just curious. Obviously, we want to spell LASA right, but I'm just saying, is there any other changes? When you say changes, is that, I think we need to be specific what the changes are.
I believe it's a reference to a playground on the site and a walking path.
What again, I know we had public comment. What specifically are we changing in there?
The typo, as far as
we
reference
need-
to school.
we-
I get the typo.
The recommendation right now is to allow us for time to go back and proofread the entire document, so we can make sure that there are no other errors that we may have missed, and also to support what Superintendent Watson has also stated.
So that would be the walking path and a playground on the site
On the side at
at North Hills.
At North Hills.
Correct.
Okay. Is there any other discussion?
Well, I do have a question. I mean, is anyone, I mean, I went through this. I do have Well, I do have a question, looking at, I guess, the Bowers Farm. I'm curious, and, you know, I'm supportive of, so one of the things the bond is going to pay for, and I'm curious if anyone can talk to it, construct a new horse stables and riding pavilion, like what is the envision there? I mean, it's 1.5 million, so what's the
I think
envision?
we're still debating the motion.
We're still
Oh,
debating.
we're still
the
debating on the motion?
Yes.
Oh, okay, I thought we were talking about the plan.
Just any discussion on the change to the motion? Okay. So could we just vote to the amendment that's been made to the motion? All those in favor with aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, 7-0. So now we will move on to the motion that has been made. Can you make the motion again? Sorry.
Sure. I move the Board of Education to approve the draft recreation master plan as presented. I also move the Board of Education task the administration to make the necessary corrections and repost the revised draft plan by March 2nd, 2023.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Now you can
Yeah,
discuss.
Yeah, I guess.
Trustee
I
Colvin.
guess the question on that is, it's fine to task, but, yeah, so if we're going to look at it, and I don't know if we're voting on it with the task or not, how much is that going to cost, and where is it going to be taken from? I mean, I'm just saying, we're going to vote on it, this is set, right, cost, you know, we have a very thin line sinking fund, the bond is all allocated out. Is it going to come from Friends of the Nature? I mean, who's,
I had the same question. On slide 59 of 92 is the detail behind the Bauer School Farm. And I believe that's what Paul's referring to, because the funding source, there's multiple funding sources for every line item on there. And it's not clear to the board what is being approved today and how much of it is actually coming out of the bond, how much of it is coming from all the other funding sources. Is that correct?
yeah, that was one of my questions,
So let
but
me-
getting back to the question of, we're amending to do a walking path and playground, and let's say that's 800,000, I don't know what the amount is.
Whatever the cost is,
Where
right.
is that coming from, you know, and so we can't approve something until we re-see it of what's taking out, you know, 800,000 is, or I'm just making up that number, is not gonna come from the air, so I don't think I'm ready to approve anything if you're gonna come back and revise, because getting to Trustee Kumar's point, you know, I was looking at the detail of the, and I do have questions on like the farm breakout. I see sinking fund, I see bond, I see Friends of the Nature Center, I see a lot of dollars in there.
Right, so this plan would be looking to allocate every specific fund immediately or even long-term. It's a long-term plan. Part of having this plan is to be able to go for the grant. In order to go to the grant, we have to have an approved draft of a plan, and yes, we can make the updates. And then if we were fortunate enough to receive that grant to get the additional property, which is by the Nature Center, then we'd have, that would be in the summer, early fall, and then we would have until October to try to get the additional $350,000. If we were not able to raise that additional $350,000 from a different source other than the school district, at that point, we do have the opportunity to return the grant, not accept it, so there would be no cost to the district. So a lot of this would need to be a living document and played out in maybe part of the 10-year capital improvement plan as well. Whereas today, we're looking for the approval, an effort mainly to go and get that grant, an opportunity for that.
So I think,
Yeah, so I get my question, like as an example, right? If I look on here, SD is sinking fund, expand teaching kitchen, $580,000, coming from partially the sinking fund. Like, I'm not ready to approve, you know, expanding a kitchen, right? You know, if we're looking at repairs. Again, I'm looking at this, I don't know, I mean, you're saying it's draft all over, we're not held to.
You're not actually
any of this?
approving, no, you're not approving these funds. You're approving a draft document.
Yes.
okay, that was the
So
main
there's no fund allocation. This will allow us to go for the grant. If we're fortunate enough to receive the grant from the Department of Natural Resources, we'll share that with the board, late summer, early fall. And then kind of like Alan Charles shared before, then the next step is, we need $350,000, and the goal is to have it at no cost to the district. So Alan has some plans in place so that if we are fortunate enough to receive the grant, we can go out and ask for these additional $350,000. If we're fortunate enough to get that, then we come back to the board and say, we received the grant, we have a third party that's covering the other $350,000. We can buy this parcel of land that is attached to the nature center at zero cost to the school district. Or maybe we come back and say, we didn't get $350,000, we got $340,000. Does the board want to allocate from one of our funds $10,000 to cover the difference? Yes or no? No, we don't. Okay, then we return the grant. So there's no risk to approving this draft. And it should be a living document that changes and gets updates.
Just to clarify,
Yes.
by approving the draft plan, we're not approving the
Any spending
on
whatsoever.
any of the line items
Correct.
shown on here.
Was that a
Correct.
requirement of the grant to have funding sources for each item?
What's required is that we have it approved, the draft approved, but also is building out that 10-year plan. We want to have an idea of where it can come from. We don't, as a group, you haven't decided as a board, is there going to be a renewal of the sinking fund? Yes or no? Is it going to be at the same, lower, higher? Those decisions haven't been made. But if we were to do all these things, these are potential resources or avenues for funding for them. And those priorities can change. But this is a draft of where we're at, what we would like to do at the farm, and it might be over 10 years. It might be 15. Some of it may not, actually occur, but it's simply a draft of long-term planning.
Is it required, again, is it required to have a funding source? Because again, it's going out to the community, a lot of misconceptions. Add pond trail and viewing area, sinking fund, $850,000. Again, if we're going to go out for a sinking fund millet, obviously, renewal, increase, and someone sees $850,000 to add a pond trail, and that's being used part of the sinking fund, that doesn't send a good message of use of funds. So can we update this and get rid of the funding sources?
We need to show a complete draft. And I would also remind the board that when it comes time and you determine when or if we're even going to do a sinking fund, you will kind of decide the buckets of what that's going to go to, and anything would have to come for approval. So if I came forward and said, hey, for the sinking fund, I want to construct the Trustee VanGemert museum at the back of booth for $4.5 million. You would simply say, no, that we love him, but we're not going to approve that type of funding for anything like that. So it wouldn't be, I'm trying to best, it was simply a draft of where it could come from. We do need a complete draft to apply for the grant. And it, like I said before, it should be a living document. It should change as we decide what our needs are in different areas of our school district.
I mean, because I was at the Friends of the Johnson Nature Center meeting, and the reality is we haven't had a strategic plan for these two institutions in terms of what we're going to do next.
Correct.
So it's just a bad timing that, like, we're rushing to get this done. We have to do it because we have to do it. But we should have done this. The last time we did it was, I think,
Over 20
2001.
years ago.
Yeah, we did it, and guess why we did it back then? Same
For a
exact
grant.
reason. So we need to be better at proactively setting up a strategic plan for these institutions, not just for right now when we need it. We got to do it because we got to do it. To Paul's point, it is just a bad timing because perception is if somebody looks at it, they say, oh, we have to pay for all this stuff right now. It's a draft. We got to do it. I mean, if it's possible to remove, the distribution of where it's going, it would probably be ideal. I don't know if we have to have it, but
We can verify with the DNR. if that's
it
a
might be worth
possibility.
it just to make it that, hey, look, this is just a draft of where we think we want to go in the next 5, 10, 15 years. It's poor timing. We should have, and we will be hopefully more proactive in making this a living document that every year we go back and say, where are we at with progress? What's new that we could do? We could leverage these institutions to help our kids. What would that require? It should not be a 20-year interval in time when we do this kind of thing. And I don't think that's the desire anymore. I think, Alan knows that this is something that should evolve
We're
over
already
time.
working on it, right?
Right.
It's already a goal, so that's been underway. The reason this was kind of pushed to the forefront is kind of what I shared before, the potential opportunity to buy a parcel of land that could become part of the nature center, which would benefit all the community. And so if we can do that and then raise it, be fortunate enough to receive the grant and then fortunate enough to get another $350,000, we then added additional green space for our community at no cost to the community and no cost to the school district. That is the end goal.
Right. And I know he mentioned that, again, ideally, we would not have it any impact to the district. There's a lot of ways that could happen. It's not just simply, we're going to go out and ask for money. There's other opportunities for how this could happen that hopefully we can take advantage of one of those. And if we can, not only will it come at no cost to the district, but potentially this helps generate other opportunities for revenue. This
Correct.
opens the door for other ways for both of them to make more revenue, which is a win for everybody. So it's a good thing in general. It's bad timing, but I think we have to proceed on to get it done.
Trustee Noble, do you have any comments? You don't have to. I just want to make sure that any other comments.
I just am very excited about the proposition of adding more land because, as we all know, things are getting developed quickly, and this opportunity might be a once in a lifetime. So I'm very excited about this.
Trustee Hill, anything?
I mean, I think we've raised awareness to what are going to be concerns down the road in terms of the final draft, so thank you for highlighting those concerns, but also thank you for explaining that this is just a draft for us to get across the line of submitting the application, and I'm satisfied with that.
Okay, Trustee VanGemert, anything? All right. I'm also good. Can we move to a vote? All those in favor for the draft and the revised motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 7-0. Okay. All right. Say it one more time.
I didn't hear everyone say aye, so I was just clarifying.
Say it one more time.
Aye.
Aye.
Usually if no one says no.
Yeah. All right. The quick method.
Paul, you're so quiet. I think she wanted to hear you say aye.
I'm good.
Okay, letter C, request to approve resolution authorizing 2023 school building and site bonds, Series 2B. Karen Hildebright, our Director of Finance. How are you? I'm well. How's it going? Is there a motion?
I move that the Board of Education adopt the attached resolution authorizing the issuance of the 2023 school building and site bonds in an amount not to exceed $86,110,000. The bonds are the third and final series of the $200,155,000 bond approved by voters on August 4th, 2020.
Support.
Thank you. It's been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? We'll start this way. Trustee VanGemert.
No questions, thank you.
None.
All right, call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, 7-0. Thank you.
I'll stay right here.
All right, yes, yes. I look up and look back down, right? Request to approve underwriter for 2023 school building and site bond Series 2B. Karen again. We have a motion.
I move that the Board of Education appoint J.P. Morgan as the underwriter for the 2023 school building and site bond Series 2B for an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $86,110,000.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
No.
Seeing none, call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, 7-0. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Next, we had. Hold for 1 second. Can you come back, Karen? We have a question. The amount for, we're trying to determine, we need a roll call vote for the $200,000.
I mean, when in doubt, let's just take a roll call vote.
So we're gonna go back just to do a roll call vote because of the amount of money that we're approving, just so we can make sure we're in compliance, if you do not mind. Okay. So we're going to go back to item letter C. Trustee Hill, yes or no? Yay or nay?
Yay.
Trustee Fowler?
Yay.
VanGemert?
Yay.
Trustee Southward, I'm a yes. Trustee Kumar?
Yay.
Trustee Colin?
Yes.
Trustee Noble? Yes. Okay. Item D, we're going to do a roll call vote again for letter D. Trustee Hill?
Yay.
Trustee Fowler?
Yay.
Trustee VanGemert?
Yes.
Trustee Southward is also a yes. Trustee Kumar?
Yay.
Trustee Colin?
Yes.
Did you forget your name? Trustee Noble?
E.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for complying with that. We appreciate it. Yes, wanted to make sure. Request to approve bid pack 5, change order for Way Elementary Fire Access Roads. We have David Goldman from Plant Moran Cressa. Is there a motion?
I move the Board of Education approve a change order to Cordis Brothers Trucking and Excavating in the amount of $265,641, architect fees in amount of $14,876, and a 10% contingency fee of $28,052 for a total of $308,569 to be paid from the bond fund.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Can you summarize the reasoning behind the change order?
Yeah, really, it stems from, unfortunately, the fires at Oakland Hills this past year. And because of our jurisdiction being with the township, the fire marshal has requested they get access to the building in case of a fire or emergency throughout any time.
You mean, I'm sorry, I'm trying to help me understand. They get access going forward of the building that's being constructed, and we originally didn't have access? I'm trying to understand what's the change?
Yeah.
What caused that we didn't have already that we should have had?
It will allow the fire apparatuses and life safety ambulances to get to the back of the school should the building catch on fire. They can get their hoses and equipment back there to fight the fire.
Yes,
Of the new construction?
Correct.
Was that something we wouldn't normally have had?
Correct.
It was a change.
We would not have normally had that. It was a change after they had some challenges at the Oakland Hills Golf Course site. This is similar to the requirement that was mandated at Conant as well.
So that from a safety procedure prior to us putting together the bond was not a best practice, and the fire at Oakland, caused, I'm just trying to understand why, as part of the bond, why wasn't it set up before? Now it's costing another $300,000.
This is not something that typically is required. This is more because of local jurisdiction and the difficulty they had. And then it was mandated that we needed to add this because the Oakland Hills, my understanding is, it would have made it easier for the first responders if they had a pathway that's paved to drive around the back of the building and have access to the back and help put out the fire.
So this is a revision to the code in the...
That I can't speak to. What I can say, it's been mandated.
What about the other buildings?
As Superintendent Watson said, Conant is getting it. Most of the other ones are okay from an aspect of that. If you'll remember, Conant is going to get access off of Forest Way, I believe, and that will also double as a hardscaped playground area during recess. We'll have gates up and everything like that. So the intention is that we'll be able to utilize this at Way as well in that same fashion.
But the other sites have a pathway for fire trucks to get in?
Yeah.
Just because we did it there and...
Yeah, and as you add on to buildings, codes change, requirements change, so it's just, because we're adding those 2 additions on the back, they want access to the backside of the building.
Okay. Any other discussion? Other than, okay, Trustee Hill. Yeah, no.
Can you help me understand the contingency fee?
Yeah, that is, it's taken out of the full contingency fund. Per project, we put that in there just so we can have, if there's unforeseen issues that come up or anything like that, it will just help cover those costs.
And it goes to,
This specific project, if it's not used, it goes back into the bond.
okay.
So like a lot of the bond items will have like a contingency amount.
Right.
So this one,
I'm just trying to figure out if the 10% was a previously negotiated amount.
It's kind of a standard that you do in the construction industry, 10% contingency. You'd like to have that. Obviously, some projects don't afford that, but yeah, that is a typical construction fee.
We have had that as part of our bond, yes.
But it's predetermined that it's 10%, because in my experience, construction contingency fees are usually 5 to 10%. This is at the max. So I'm trying to figure out if this was predetermined somewhere.
It's, again, Dave can speak to this.
Like I said, it's everything that we have presented thus far has had that 10% contingency on it. Again, if it's not used, we monitor it closely with the finance team here and put it back into the bond to be reallocated elsewhere.
If things go according to plan, it'll flow back to the main contingency pool being held centrally.
Sure. Okay.
good point, though, very good point. Any other question, any other discussion? All right, so we'll call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Thank you. Have a great night, David. Okay, so, request to award bid for Conant and Way furniture additions. Agenda item, David Shulkin, our Director of Learning Technology.
Good evening.
Hi, David. Is there a motion?
I move the Board of Education approve the not-to-exceed purchase of furniture totaling $420,000 for Conant Elementary and $420,000 for Way Elementary. The total sum of $840,000 includes the procurement of furniture, delivery and installation services, and are to be paid using bond funds.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
I just have a general question. I don't know if it's a Dave question or a Pat question. Just for the staff across the district, what's been the process in terms of I know this has come up, determining the furniture?
Yeah, so we have a variety of stakeholder inputs, both from focus groups, pilot testing, surveys, and observation. And that has been the input, as well as a steering committee of a number of administrators, et cetera, that help determine what we've picked and decided upon and went with.
And then how does it trickle down to all the staff in terms of knowing what's coming and what their input was?
Yes. Yeah.
So it wouldn't be a shock, right? So staff shouldn't be shocked on what's coming, and they've had some input into this throughout the process.
Yep.
What's the time frame for the other elementary schools getting furniture?
Yeah, so we'll start that design process here in June. We'll pick our vendor, and then we'll move for our vendors, depending on the situation. Then we'll start that design process through the summer, and we're already getting feedback and stakeholder input as we go along from those pilots, focus groups, et cetera. So then you will see probably around this time frame, a year from now or a little bit before, we'll go ahead and approve for the elementary schools. And that'll include all those classrooms, so from kindergarten through 5th grade.
Okay.
Yeah, it's good to note that this award here is a partial for both those buildings. And this is just for the additions that we put on the cafetorium, the Ingenuity Lab, the Media Center, and the main offices.
So it's new equipment replacing nothing, or is it replacing something in any case?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
So depending on the situation. And also, if you might recall, and for our new board members as well, we did a facility assessment for all of our furniture across the district. And so part of the design process is actually to use that, especially if it's good. And we had a vendor, they ranked those, and then we've been reviewing those. So for example, let's say this lectern was something that we've had for a number of years, but it's in really great shape. We would use that in that facility and not buy something new. And that way we could take advantage. Because as you note, as is we've kind of talked before, let's say we've had a base budget or square footage budget. When we did the bond program, we didn't have designs for these buildings. You had no clue. So you might put a number to a square footage, and then as these build out, then you're having to make decisions. And so, for example, we have a roughly, a rule of thumb, 20,000 per classroom. But in our classroom, a science classroom will be upwards of 40,000. And so you're kind of managing through there. And so when those cost structures and differences. And so whenever we can use any of our current furniture that works, we absolutely are doing so.
Okay.
Any other discussion? All right, so we'll call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries 6-0. Okay. Next, request to award bid 1043, district-wide asbestos and abatement. David Goldman is back from Plant Moran Cressa. Is there a motion?
I move the Board of Education approve bid number 1043, 2023, district-wide asbestos abatement in the amount of $69,650 with the addition of 10% contingency of $6,965 to Global Green Service Group, LLC, bringing the total approved budget to $76,615 to be funded by the 2020 bond fund.
Is there,
Second?
it's been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Ooh, nice. Request to approve amendment to the Oakland County School Board Association bylaws. Trustee John VanGemert, our representative from the OCSBA. All right, John, you're up.
As everyone's aware, I sent out an email. There was a meeting at the beginning of February. A vote is required prior to the next OCSBA meeting. I believe it's the first week of March. I asked that everyone take a look at the amendments, and if they had any questions, they could ask them here today. But essentially, this one is just an amendment to the association bylaws. We have to vote at the next meeting. I need to know if you want me to vote in favor or against amending the bylaws. As presented, I believe they're attached for the public if anyone cares. Do I have a motion?
Is there a motion?
I move the Board of Education to approve the amendments to the Oakland County School Boards Association bylaws as presented.
Is there a second?
Second?
All right, any discussion?
You want to call for a vote?
All right, so we could do a roll call vote on this to, all right, so we'll go this way. Trustee Noble,
Yes.
Trustee Colin,
Yes.
okay, Trustee Kumar,
Yes.
I'm a yes. Trustee VanGemert.
Yes.
Trustee Fala,
Yes.
Trustee Hill.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries to amend. You want this?
Sure.
You're welcome. Letter I, request to approve Oakland County School Board Association's new and amended resolution for 2023. Trustee VanGemert, our representative. Is there a motion?
I move the Board of Education to approve the 2023 Oakland County School Boards Association's proposed and new and amended resolutions as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? There's only the one change,
There's
right?
one thing, right?
It's just the one change, right? All right, we'll do a roll call vote. Trustee Hill. Oh, sorry.
There are continuing resolutions with regard to mental health. So
There's another one?
if you look at the document, They continue past resolutions with regard to mental health, local control, evidence-based decision-making, unfunded mandates, and so forth. But there's not any changes to any of those resolutions, if that makes sense.
So they continue to resolve, but there's no change.
Right.
So they were, I mean, the way I read it, they were already there. It's not like
Right.
they just adopted these. So
Right.
okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, as of 2019.
What's the highlight?
Anything else you want to add, Trustee VanGemert?
No, thank you.
Any other discussion? Any?
No.
All right, so we'll do a roll call vote. Trustee Hill,
Aye.
Trustee Fowler,
Aye.
Trustee VanGemert.
Aye.
I'm a yes. Trustee Kumar,
Yes.
Trustee Poland.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay. All right, you guys like me saying your name? You can have that one too. Okay, so letter J, request to approve the 2023 district and superintendent goals. Pat Watson, superintendent, is there a motion?
I move the Board of Education to approve the 2023 district and superintendent goals as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded. We'll start discussion. Anybody want to start? Anyone prefer to start discussion? Any discussion?
I could start. Obviously, at the last meeting, I think some of the measurables are still low. I'm obviously going to approve it, but I still, object. I think the measurables on some of the academics can go up a little bit higher.
My observation is it is extremely lengthy, the goals. I think that's the disadvantage of coming in with 3 brand-new board members. It's tough to try to get up to speed and try and have a meaningful contribution to this incredibly important task right out of the gate. That's why one of my personal goals that's going to be as a board is to shift this to a calendar year. I understand there's complications, there's ins and outs with the good and bad of that, which we can have a discussion about that at a later time, but I think that this specific instance is one of the disadvantages of this operating on a calendar year as opposed to a school year. So I guess my observation is that a lot of them are good. I think they're lengthy. I think some of them could have been tightened up in a cleaner way that's, best to make them more smart goals. But we had our deliberation, and here we are.
Trustee Fowler, thank you, Trustee Hill.
No, I would echo what Trustee Hill said. I think it's incredibly important that I think there are too many. We have a lot. And I think it was an exercise of understanding for some of us what goes into this. We all have ideas about what's important, and they're all important, but we need to do a good job of making sure that we have things that are attainable, and hopefully down the road that they are in a school year rather than a calendar year. I agree with that. I don't think it makes sense to tie these, annually. Just it doesn't match with assessments. It doesn't match with when kids are in school. I know, we might have to talk about the evaluation for our superintendent and things like that, but I think long-term that makes sense. Besides that, I think the other important thing was we need to this is a good time for us, some of the things we don't know. AP enrollment, for example, some of these things we're throwing shots in the dark. I don't really like that as goals, but it's also a good chance for us to find out what baselines are. So that next year when we come to this point, whenever that ends up being, we're not going to be just randomly pulling things out of the sky. The goal is for district and board goals. We should be able to use these, enough of them year over year that we can see some consistency behind them. And outside of that, the other important thing that came out of the last study session was that I think we learned a lot from all the different teams in the district, learning services, everybody, and I appreciated the open, honest, transparent feedback about what some of these numbers mean, which conflicted with what some of our thoughts were. So I was appreciative of that.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? Trustee VanGemert?
It does feel like there's a lot, I would say that a number of them are related to student achievement and could be consolidated into, say, this is our goal, and then A, B, C, and D, so it feels like a lot, but I think a lot of them are student achievement related, which is good, and I'm fine with what we hashed out 2 weeks ago.
Trustee Kumar?
I agree with Trustee VanGemert. All of the student achievement goals can essentially be categorized under one umbrella. And though they've been broken out, there's probably like 6 of them. They really can be condensed to literally 2 or 3. Because if you do like item number 5, you automatically achieve item number 3. And there's a few like that in there. So I would say that there's probably, really, going back to our community member Cynthia's earlier point, there's probably like 6 goals in there, really, if you really think about it, or less. So I would say, yes, it looks like a long list, but it's really about student achievement, some on media, and at the early part of it is focused on improving the sense of inclusion. So it's really, those are the big 3 broad themes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Kumar. Trustee Colin?
I mean, I commented before,
Sure.
But, if you want, some of these things, looking at it, I don't know if they're a goal, if we wanted to eliminate, like, having a district website, social media policy. I don't know if it's a goal or just an action. Some of those things in there, if we wanted to take out, I wouldn't be against some of those things being taken out that may not be a goal as opposed to just an action.
Are you making recommendations for?
I think, like, if I look at if I look at 12 and 15 as an example, or 15, by November 2023, BHS will have a reimagined district website. There's no measurable on there. I mean, we're all for a district website, but we could probably take that out as a goal. And by November 2023, BHS would develop the district-wide social media policy and train staff. There's no measurable there, so I wouldn't be opposed to taking out 12 and 15.
Okay. Those are recommendations.
That's a recommendation. If the board would like to, or NPAD would like to entertain those two, to lower the amount of goals.
My recommendation is leave everything as is and move forward. We've talked about this a lot. People are working on things. As far as measurables, for number 12, trained staff, that's just documenting all the staff that's been trained, right? Did we get 90%? Did we get 85%? As far as the reimagined district website, that should be visually noticeable, some of the differences as you go in and navigate. As far as the other ones, as far as being SMART goals, they're all written in SMART goals. Kind of is what it is, and I say, please take a vote and just move forward at this point.
Thank you, Pat. Trustee Noble?
Yeah, I don't really have anything other than it does seem like a lot of goals, but let's try to aim for it and see where we are next year, and we'll keep, thinking about it, kind of like what Ms. Hill, Trustee Hill said. I'm new to this as well, so it's good to have a baseline, so that's how I feel.
I do have one further comment before
Of course.
we vote, and I apologize, Pat, because I agree with you. We need to make a decision to move on. Part of the reason that I said I was somewhat uncomfortable with it, but I'm willing to support it, is because I think the vision moving forward is going to tie into one of our board goals to work on this year long, so that we don't come to January and say, and we recreate the wheel. So I think as a board, it's our responsibility to tidy this process up throughout this year. And I think it's going to be hopefully one of the goals I think we're all going to agree on. In working on our board goals together, I think that we show a lot of ability to work together. I think we have a lot of parallel ideas, maybe just nuances on how to get there. So I'm willing to accept this today. Imperfect, good, but I think it's an opportunity for us as a board to work on this throughout the year. So next January, when we set 2024 goals, they're clean and ready to go.
Thank you. All right. Well put. Thank you for your closing statement. Anything else anyone else wants to say before we vote? Okay. Call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Oh, 7-0. Woo. All right, so just want to say before we close out, to all our families that are without power or electricity, that we're keeping you in our thoughts. And then I think that's cause for an adjournment.
Can we make
Wait.
an amendment to take K off?
We already did.
Oh, we did? Oh, I missed that.